I say this slowly so no one can pretend they misheard. The Sahel airspace is no longer open. I am not speaking in anger. I am speaking in clarity. Because when a people must ask permission to defend the sky above their own land, that people is not free. And the Sahel has paid too high a price for other nations' so-called technical misunderstandings. Because the fish and Arda station. On the 8th of December 2025, a Nigerian military aircraft entered our airspace. They called it a technical incident. A do for someone time and saw it. We called it by its real name, a violation of sovereignty. The difference is not language. It is position. I want Africa to hear this clearly. There is no such thing as an innocent incident involving military airspace. There is no such thing as a neutral emergency landing inside a region already surrounded by geopolitical pressure. And there is no nation with dignity that accepts this and remains silent. Let me remind you of one thing, we are not naive. 48 hours earlier, Nigerian fighter jets entered Benin. Military intervention. No apology. No hesitation. And ECOWAS called it protecting order. A tester on the tester. So I ask directly, when Nigeria flies into Benin, it is called stability. When Nigeria flies into the Sahel, it is called an accident. We are not foolish. We are not blind. And we no longer accept double standards. If you claim the right to defend your interests, then we claim the right to defend our sovereignty. The Sahel is not a backyard. That C-130 aircraft did not carry only 11 soldiers. It carried a test of whether the Sahel would still bow, a test of whether we would still hesitate between polite diplomacy and real sovereignty. And we answered. We forced the aircraft to land. We detained the personnel. We placed air defense on high alert. Not because we seek conflict, but because this is the only language understood by those who refuse to respect boundaries. Let me be clear. Stability cannot be dropped from the sky. For decades, Africa was taught a false lesson. Stability matters more than sovereignty. When asked to are. But I ask you, stability for whom? So who can sleep peacefully? So who can continue extraction without being questioned? A stability where people remain poor while decisions are made elsewhere is not stability. It is control. And I will not remove faith from this conversation. Because many of us believe God did not preserve a people through slavery, colonialism, and betrayal just so they could kneel quietly in the 21st century. Faith was not given to pacify us. Faith was given to make us stand. If you believe a nation has the right to say no, write amen in the comments. Not for me. For your own position. So I ask you without politeness, does Africa need stability at any cost? Or self-determination, even when the price is high? Who has harmed Africa more? External powers, or internal leaders who traded sovereignty for approval? Where are you watching from? Write it. Let the world see we are not alone. The Sahel has chosen. We are not looking for war. But we will not run from confrontation. We did not leave ECOWAS out of emotion. We left because trust was dead. And I say this to every power inside and outside Africa. Our sky is no longer a gray zone. It is a red line. The C-130 touched the ground, but the message of the Sahel traveled far. We do not ask permission to exist. We do not ask permission to defend ourselves. And we do not ask permission to own our destiny. If you stand with Africa's right to self-rule, right. I stand with Africa. Like this video so the algorithm cannot bury this voice. Subscribe so we keep saying what others refuse to say. Tell me which country should the next video confront directly? Because the Sahel has spoken. And we will not lower our voice again. If you think what happened in the Sahel was an accident, stay with me for 60 seconds. Because accidents do not repeat this cleanly. They follow patterns. And patterns reveal intent. What entered our airspace was not just metal and fuel. It was a message wrapped in deniability. A message designed to test reaction time, resolve, and memory. This is how pressure is applied now. Quietly. Incrementally. Always with a press release prepared in advance. They call it coordination. They call it security cooperation. They call it regional responsibility. But listen carefully. Power moves without consent. It is not cooperation. It is enforcement. And the Sahel has seen this script before. For decades, Africa was trained to confuse obedience with peace, to confuse silence with stability, to confuse submission with maturity. That training did not happen by chance. It was taught. It was reinforced through loans that came with conditions, through security agreements that came with shadows, through leaders who spoke African languages to their people but answered phones in foreign capitals. And here is the uncomfortable truth. External pressure only works when internal doors are already open. This is why they prefer partners over patriots. This is why they reward predictability, not courage. This is why the same leaders are praised abroad while questioned at home. Ask yourself this and answer honestly in the comments. Who has harmed Africa more? The powers that apply pressure from outside, or the elites who translate that pressure into policy? Do not soften it. Silence is how this system stays elegant. Now let me say something clearly, because some people still pretend not to understand. The Sahel did not wake up one morning and choose confrontation. We were pushed here slowly, deliberately, and repeatedly. Borders were crossed. Warnings were ignored. Double standards were normalized. When some nations intervene militarily, it is called restoring order. 2. When the Sahel defends its airspace, it is called destabilizing. That is not analysis. That is propaganda. And propaganda only works when people forget history. Which brings me to the part they do not want discussed. Africa has been destabilized not by saying no, but by being told no over and over when we ask for dignity. No to controlling our currencies. No to protecting our resources. No to choosing our security partners freely. No to defining our own timelines. And then they ask why resentment grows. Let me be direct. People do not resist because they hate peace. They resist because peace was offered only to others. If this sounds familiar, press like now. That single action tells the system this conversation is being heard. And if you want analysis that names patterns, instead of excusing them, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because what comes next is where this becomes dangerous for them. Here is the pivot. The moment the Sahel said no, the language changed. Concern became alarm. Advice became warning. Partnership became threat. Suddenly, sovereignty was framed as recklessness. Self-defense was framed as aggression. And unity was framed as extremism. This is not coincidence. This is containment. Write this in the comments if you recognize it. They only respect you when you comply. Uncris it. Because once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. And once a people stops accepting patterns designed to control them, pressure loses its power. In the next chapter, I will show you the proof they avoid. One country, one resource, one contradiction, so clear, it breaks the narrative. Stay with me. Because what powered foreign cities left African homes in darkness? And that is not history, that is evidence. If you still think this is theory, let this land hard. Because theories do not keep lights on in foreign capitals while leaving African children in darkness. For more than 4 decades, uranium taken from Niger powered cities far beyond the Sahel. Streetlights burned all night. Factories never slept. Entire modern economies ran on energy pulled from Nigerian soil. And yet, on that same soil, darkness ruled. Villages without electricity, clinics without power, children studying by candlelight while reactors abroad glowed without interruption. This is not neglect. This is design. Design means intention. It means someone decided that light would travel outward while darkness remained local. That profit would move abroad while poverty stayed behind. That value would be extracted, but development would be postponed indefinitely. And Niger is not an exception. It is a blueprint. Across the Sahel, the pattern repeats with brutal consistency. Gold without roads, oil without hospitals, minerals guarded by soldiers while nearby communities are abandoned. Extraction zones treated like foreign territory inside African borders. Wealth leaves faster than dust can settle. The same voices return calm, confident, and label Africa poor. And quote, "Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever felt shame or anger when outsiders called Africa the poor continent? Write yes in the comments if you have. That feeling is not weakness. It is recognition. Recognition that the story you were taught does not match the reality you can see. Here is the truth they avoid saying clearly. People do not rise because they are impatient. They rise because they are cornered. For decades, Africans were told to wait. Wait for development. Wait for reform. Wait for aid. Wait for democracy to mature. But the only thing that arrived on time was loss. Loss of land. Loss of dignity. Loss of time. And then something changed. When Niger, Mali, and Burkina finally said no, the world did not debate. It panicked. Because panic does not come from poverty. Panic comes when control slips. Sanctions followed. Threats followed. Moral lectures followed. Suddenly, the same powers that ignored darkness cared deeply about stability. It was not the Eustace grade, sometimes Cree, December though. Suddenly, sovereignty became dangerous. Suddenly, African decisions were called irresponsible. Pause here and act. If this chapter says what you have felt, but were never allowed to say, press like right now. That single action tells the system this conversation will not be quietly buried. And if you want content that names patterns instead of hiding them, subscribe and turn on notifications. Channels like this survive only when viewers refuse to stay invisible. Now answer this directly in the comments, one word only. What hurts you most when you think about Africa? Exploitation, disrespect, or division? Pain reveals priority. Because the moment Niger said no, the mask slipped. And the response exposed what this was always about. Control. In the next chapter, we move from resources to retaliation. From extraction to punishment. From quiet pressure to open warning. Stay with me. Because once the system is challenged, it always responds the same way. And this time, the response failed. The moment Niger said no, the system answered exactly as it always does. Not with dialogue. Not with humility. But with pressure dressed as morality. Pressure came first. Sanctions wrapped in noble language. Isolation disguised as responsibility. Media repetition again and again of the same words. Instability, extremism, danger. Context vanished. History was erased. Fear was amplified. This is not coincidence. This is choreography. Across the Sahel, the pattern is familiar to anyone who has been paying attention. Challenge, extraction, and you are labeled reckless. Defend sovereignty and you are branded dangerous. Refuse obedience and you are accused of threatening regional stability. Parsons watching, and it's fine. But ask yourself, stability for whom? At the same time, the headlines multiplied, violence escalated on the ground. Armed groups grew bolder. Attacks intensified. The timing was not random. The message was clear and deliberate. Obedience brings stability. Self-determination brings chaos. 1-2. This is an old script, but this time it failed. Because people named the pattern. Once pressure is named, it loses power. Once fear is understood, it stops controlling behavior. Africans recognized that instability was not accidental. Chaos was not spontaneous. It was a tool. A lever pulled whenever control slipped. A warning shot meant to discipline anyone who dared step out of line. Write pattern in the comments if you see it too. Naming is the first form of resistance. And here is what the system did not expect. Instead of retreat, African societies compared notes. Instead of panic, they remembered history. Instead of isolation, they spoke across borders that were never meant to unite. Because fear only works when people feel alone. The media said the Sahel was collapsing. But on the ground, something else was happening. People were connecting the dots. From Niger to Burkina. From Mali to communities across Africa and the diaspora. And once people understand that pressure is punishment for disobedience, the fear changes sides. Pause here. If you have ever noticed how quickly human rights language appears only when African governments refuse orders, press like now. That signal matters more than you think. Subscribe if you want analysis that explains consequences instead of repeating slogans. Because what came next was not diplomacy. It was escalation. And that escalation exposed the final lie. That the system prefers peace over control. In the next chapter, we confront the real objective behind the pressure. Not stability, not democracy, but obedience. Stay with me. Because once fear stopped working, the system had to reveal its true face. Once fear stopped working, the system changed tactics. It reached for division. Because every structure that survives theft depends on one condition. The victims must never unite. That is why Africa was sliced into artificial borders. That is why tribes were weaponized against each other. That is why religion was politicized. That is why language became a wall instead of a bridge. Division was never a side effect. It was the strategy, because a united Africa is not manageable. Let us be honest, external powers did not succeed alone. They studied our fractures and pressed where it hurt most. And internal traitors helped them. Leaders who chose comfort over conscience. Elites who traded national dignity for foreign approval. Men who learned how to speak about African pride in public while selling it in private. They were rewarded for dividing the people. They were promoted for silencing unity. They were protected for keeping the system intact. Write divide in the comments if you recognize this pattern. Because here is the part many avoid. Division survives because it pays. Divide the people and you become indispensable. Unite the people and you become dangerous. That is why unity terrifies them more than weapons. Weapons can be embargoed. Unity cannot. When Sahel nations chose mutual defense, it was not symbolism. It was memory. For decades, African countries were isolated and punished one by one. Pressure applied individually. Sanctions targeted selectively. Narratives rewritten separately. Today, that formula is breaking. But hear me clearly. Unity without economic sovereignty is illusion. Unity without control over energy, food, finance, and infrastructure is decoration. Flags do not feed people. Control does. This is where the lie of African unity is often exposed. They celebrate unity in speeches, but reject it in contracts. They praise cooperation, but punish coordination. They applaud dialogue until it threatens extraction. Answer this directly in the comments. Who has harmed Africans more, outside powers or internal leaders who betrayed their own people? Do not soften it. Silence is the tax division collects. And ask yourself something deeper. Should Africa continue playing by their rules? Or should Africa write new rules, even if the price is high? There is no safe middle ground. Neutrality only serves the system. If this question makes you uneasy, press like now. Discomfort is proof you are thinking. And subscribe if you want a community that speaks without fear. Because in the next chapter, we confront the most dangerous force of all. A generation that no longer accepts humiliation as destiny. Stay here. The pressure is about to shift again. Here is what truly terrified the system. Not protests, not speeches, not elections. Youth. Africa is the youngest continent on earth. Hundreds of millions under the age of 25. This is not a burden. It is a threat to systems built on cheap labor, fragmented societies, and obedient governments. Youth unemployment is not an accident. It is engineered. Economies designed to extract raw materials do not create futures. They create waiting rooms. They create frustration. They create silence until silence breaks. Change the design, and the outcome changes. Keep the design, and anger grows. Ask yourself this, and answer honestly. Why is Africa always described as the future, but never allowed to control it? Because a confident, educated, economically independent African youth is ungovernable by old rules. That is why narratives intensify. That is why pressure accelerates. That is why time suddenly matters to them. They rush reforms that never reform. They announce programs that never empower. They promise opportunity tomorrow. Tomorrow is how extraction survives. If you are young and African, or African by blood, hear this clearly. Not born to inherit excuses. You were born to inherit responsibility. Responsibility to question. Responsibility to rebuild. Responsibility to refuse humiliation. And if you are part of the African diaspora, listen closely. Many of you live between worlds. Accepted conditionally in the West. Questioned constantly about where you belong. So answer this in the comments without apology. Where do you feel you belong? Where your passport is issued, or where your blood comes from. Write it. Because millions are reading and feeling the same conflict alone. This struggle is not about hatred. It is about refusal. Refusal to pass silence to the next generation. Refusal to teach children that dependency is destiny. Refusal to accept that dignity must be imported. And yes, faith matters here. Many Africans believe God did not preserve us through slavery, colonialism, and betrayal, so we could remain quiet beneficiaries of someone else's system. God does not free people so they can kneel forever. If you believe Africa has a future worth fighting for, write "I stand with Africa" in the comments. Let the algorithm see conviction. Let others see courage. Tell us which country you are watching from. Say it clearly. Because the next chapter exposes the one weapon the system fears more than youth: memory. Stay with me. Erase. There is one thing the system fears more than youth. More than protests. More than speeches. More than elections. It fears memory. Because the moment a people remembers who they were before humiliation, control becomes fragile. Africa is dangerous not when it is angry, but when it is conscious of its history, conscious of its value, conscious of the tricks used to keep it quiet. That is why history was rewritten. That is why textbooks were softened. That is why African resistance was reduced to footnotes, while African suffering was turned into identity. We were taught what was done to us, but rarely what we did back. We were taught pain, not power. Victimhood, not agency. Answer this honestly in the comments. If you were born in Africa, do you believe you were taught the true history of your own continent, or a version designed to make others comfortable? Because no nation rises while living inside a borrowed narrative. The system wants Africans to remember slavery, but forget resistance. To remember colonialism, but forget victory. To remember weakness, but forget genius. Because memory creates confidence, and confidence creates disobedience. And disobedience is the one thing extraction systems cannot tolerate. This is why unity across borders is dangerous. This is why Pan-African ideas are mocked, minimized, or framed as unrealistic. Not because they are impossible, because they are uncontrollable. They awaken memory across lines designed to keep people separate. They reconnect names that were forced apart. They remind Africa that it was never meant to be small. And here is where faith and memory collide. Many Africans believe God is not neutral about justice, that he hears nations, not only individuals, that he does not preserve a people through centuries of slavery, conquest, and betrayal just to leave them silent at the end. Throughout history, every liberation began with remembrance, a moment when people realized they were not born to kneel. If you believe Africa was not created to live permanently on its knees, write Amen in the comments. Let it be seen. Let it be counted. Now act again. If this chapter forced you to question what you were taught in school or shown in Western media about Africa, press like. And if you want content that restores memory instead of erasing it, subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel exists to challenge forgetting. Before we move to the final chapter, answer this as well. One sentence is enough. What was the first moment you began to doubt what Western books or media taught you about Africa? Because once memory returns, one unavoidable question follows. What do we do now? Stay with me. Memory leads to one unavoidable truth. There is no neutral position anymore. Africa stands at a fork in the road. One path promises stability at any cost, quiet obedience, predictable suffering, managed decline dressed as peace. The other path demands self-determination. It demands sacrifice. It demands discipline. It demands courage. So I ask you plainly, answer it without politeness. Should Africa accept stability at any price, or choose self-rule even if the cost is high? There is no safe answer, only an honest one. Write it in the comments. This is not a romantic struggle. It is not a movie. It is a generational decision. Either Africa continues to play by rules written to extract from it, or Africans begin writing new rules, fully aware that resistance will come. And yes, resistance will come. It always does when power shifts. But understand this clearly. Nothing changes without pressure. Nothing moves without consequence. And nothing meaningful is built by people who refuse to choose. Silence is a choice. Delay is a choice. Neutrality is a luxury Africa can no longer afford. If you are African by birth or by blood, this moment belongs to you whether you asked for it or not. If you are in the African diaspora, this moment still belongs to you. Distance does not erase responsibility. Comfort does not cancel calling. And I will not remove faith from this conclusion. God does not free people so they can outsource their destiny. God does not awaken a generation just to watch it look away. If this video says what you already feel, but were afraid to say out loud, write, "I stand with Africa," in the comments. Let others find you. Let the algorithm register conviction. Tell us which country you are watching from. Say it clearly. Let the world see how wide this community reaches. And tell me which country you want the next video to focus on: Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, Mali, Burkina, Niger, South Africa, or another. This is not a monologue. It is a conversation. Africa is not poor. Africa is taken. And once a people stops accepting theft as normal, silence ends. When silence ends, systems shake. Stay visible, stay grounded, and stay ready.